On May the 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted.
It was awesome. I just didn't want to tear my eyes away from it.
I mean, it just took the woods and they were gone.
These men had been caught up in an explosion, the power of 27,000 Hiroshima bombs.
I thought for sure I was dead.
Astonishingly, he lived to tell the tale. Many of those around him did not.
I never really thought I'd believe this or say this, but at this moment, I honest to God believe I'm dead.
The destruction of Mount St. Helens was a sight that no man had ever seen before, like no other volcanic eruption in recorded history. The whole top of the mountain was ripped off, and 370 square miles of the United States were wiped out at a stroke. 57 lives were lost, and all in front of the TV cameras. This was the best documented volcanic eruption of all time, the starting point for modern volcanology. Now scientists have been able to work out what went on deep inside the mountain. The second-by-second sequence of events that triggered the biggest explosion ever seen in the United States. For over 120 years before that fateful morning in 1980, Mount St. Helens was an American beauty, hidden away in the northwest corner of the United States. At its feet was Spirit Lake, whose clear water and wooded shores had attracted generations of tourists. Geologists, however, were more wary. To them, Mount St. Helens spelt danger, the youngest and most active of 13 volcanoes called the Cascades. For all its beauty, it was just a great cone of rubble, formed from layers and layers of volcanic debris. But the last eruption had been back in 1857, and since then the mountain had slumbered. People forgot. Few even realized any longer that it was a volcano, knew nothing about the simmering energy being held back beneath the mountain's fragile plug of ice and rock. But the geologists did.
We basically believe that the past is the key to the future. So when a volcano proceeds to erupt over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, and it's still erupting every few thousand years or every few hundred years, there's no reason to assume that it will stop.
The 123 years of peace ended on Thursday, March the 20th, 1980. That day, scientists recorded an earthquake directly underneath Mount St. Helens. It was to be the first of more than 10,000 earthquakes that would shake the mountain over the next 2 months.
One of the best signals for volcanologists that an eruption is about to happen is that you start to see a real buildup in these earthquakes because the magma's fighting its way up to the surface.
Beneath the Cascade Mountains, as much as 8 miles down, enormous pressure had turned the Earth's rocks into magma, a red-hot, viscous liquid. This magma was seeking a way to the surface. It probed every crack in the Earth's crust above it, pushing and smashing the rocks in its path. This was what was causing the earthquakes beneath Mount St. Helens. The magma was on its way.
Even though in textbooks it looks like there's just a soda straw that goes from the top of the volcano down to the magma reservoir, in reality you probably have a numerous network of cracks. So it's probably a very complex network with little fingers working their way upward, and eventually they'll coalesce into something that's vaguely pipe-like.
But at the end of March, something unusual happened. As the magma surged up the inside of the volcano, its pipe had hardened into a solid plug, which wouldn't budge. Instead, the magma was diverted to the north side of the mountain. There it stopped and began to grow into a huge seething bubble inside the mountain, called a cryptodome.
We call something that actually comes out on the surface a dome, and crypto means hidden. It was a hidden dome because it was just barely below the surface.
The bubble continued to grow, inflated by the arrival of more magma from below. By March, the bubble had grown so much that it began to push out the side of the volcano. Scientists on the surface watched as a bulge appeared on Mount St. Helens' northern flank. It was growing at a rate of 6 feet a day.
This is the first time that scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey had ever seen an intrusion into the upper part of an edifice like Mount St. Helens. So we were quite excited about this event. Excited on the one hand and nervous on the other hand.
845.
Their excitement grew in late March, when the volcano started to throw out plumes of ash, a sure sign that it had come back to life. For the first time, the general public woke up to the fact that Mount St. Helens was a living volcano, and that it was going to erupt. Soon the media descended on the mountain. Mount St. Helens became the star of every news broadcast.
In Washington state, Mount St. Helens is now showing all the signs leading to a full-scale eruption, and scientists say it could come at any time.
If it does go, geologists say it'll be spectacular, dwarfing current eruptions. People here generally are impatient for the real fireworks to start.
On March the 31st, a state of emergency was declared. The government set up a 20-mile exclusion zone around the volcano.
Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens is my life, folks. I've lived there 50 years. It's a part of me.
But some refused to go. 84-year-old local character Harry Truman had lived on Spirit Lake for more than 50 years and refused to budge. In the media frenzy that followed, he became a national hero.
No, I'm not going to leave. You're damn right I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay here.
Others just outside the security zone, loggers like Jim Schmanke and his 3 workmates, worked on, unconcerned in the shadow of the mountain.
Well, I mean, we knew it had been acting up, and they were trying to keep all the tourists away from the mountain. We weren't worried about it because we were a long way from it.
But the volcano stubbornly refused to erupt. Soon the spectators and the news crews lost interest. Mount St. Helens faded from the headlines. Most of the scientists packed their bags and went home. A lone volcanologist, David Johnston, was left behind to keep an eye on the volcano.
It could be within hours, it could be within days, or even up to a couple of months.
On the night of May 17th, he was stationed 5 miles north of the mountain.
Its historic eruptions and older eruptions, prehistoric, have been very explosive. On the near flanks, where we are right now, would likely be covered by avalanches of very hot debris, up to 1,000 degrees centigrade.
By the morning of May the 18th, the ominous bulge was almost a mile square and protruded 300 feet from the north flank of the mountain. Hidden beneath its surface was the seething bubble of magma, now under enormous pressure. As long as the bulge remained in place, it acted as a lid, preventing the magma's escape.
As long as you can keep the lid on, then you've got a primed bomb. As soon as you remove that lid, then you all of a sudden can depressurize it, and when it depressurizes, you're going to cause lots of little bubbles to form, and you'll get a very catastrophic expansion of the material.
For Jim Schmanke, Sunday, May the 18th was just another working day.
Oh, the day was just sunny, beautiful, calm, no wind, just perfect for cutting in the woods. And we were just had a few more acres to cut. And Sunday morning, we wanted to get it out of our way.
It seemed a perfect morning to have her birthday treat, a flight over the mountain, organized by her husband.
I thought to myself that the mountain had really gone back into dormancy, and a sense of disappointment that we wouldn't see anything.
On the contrary, Dorothy Stoffel would be the first person to see a unique and catastrophic event that was to change the face of the Earth and nearly take her life. Mount St. Helens had been rocked by over 10,000 earthquakes. But by the end of the month, an ominous bulge had swollen grotesquely on its northern flank.
It didn't take us long to realize that the bulge indicated that there was magma coming into the volcano. It was sort of inflating the volcano like a water balloon, and that this was going to lead to something catastrophic.
The 370 square miles surrounding Mount St. Helens was about to be transformed from a beautiful national park to a scene of total devastation.
I knew this area very well, and nothing in my wildest dreams prepared me for this moonscape that was left after the events of May 18.
On Sunday, May the 18th, 1980, the sequence of seismic events that had been building for the past 2 months was about to come to a final and unexpected conclusion. At 8:32 and 11 seconds, a last gigantic surge of magma forced its way up the volcano and caused the biggest earthquake so far. This earthquake, 5.1 on the Richter scale, triggered a cataclysmic series of events. At 8:32 and 30 seconds, the earthquake shook free the bulge. It began to slide down the mountain, the biggest landslide ever recorded. Soon it had reached a speed of 100 miles per hour. At 8:32 and 40 seconds, it ripped away the rock holding back the supercharged bubble of magma, like a cork exploding from a champagne bottle.
A tremendous explosion.
The energy released by the blast at Mount St. Helens was unprecedented. The equivalent of one Hiroshima bomb every second.
And just to get an idea of it, if I take water and I turn it into a gas by boiling it, then I change the volume by about 22 times. So just imagine every little bubble or every little bit of liquid expanding by a factor of 22, and you can imagine the driving force for the blast.
This was like no previous eruption. Volcanoes erupt vertically. This sudden catastrophic blast out of the side of the mountain stunned the scientists.
The Mount St. Helens eruption was quite unique because instead of erupting initially vertically, because of the configuration of the bulge on the north flank, because of this debris avalanche event that broke off the north flank, the explosion was directed horizontally, or nearly horizontally, what we call a directed blast or a laterally directed blast. And this event is a very rare kind of event.
We had just cleared the crater in this enormous lower blast, exploded horizontally. We think of volcanoes blowing up and not out. Fear took over the excitement, and in fact, I really thought we weren't going to get out alive at that point.
As Dorothy's aircraft dived away to the south, the sideways blast fanned out towards the north at speeds of up to 700 miles per hour.
So the blast cloud itself consisted of fragments of the cryptodome, some of them very large, in fact some of them as large as houses initially, fragments of the old northern flank of the volcano, and later on during the blast the materials that formed the summit of the volcano and part of the interior of the volcano. So this was a cloud of debris moving at very high speeds.
At 8:33 and 50 seconds, this moving wall of rocks sped towards a ridge 5 miles to the north. On it stood the lone volcanologist, David Johnston.
He observed the beginning of the eruption. In fact, he radioed to us in Vancouver and announced that the eruption had begun.
Vancouver, this is it!
At 8:34, David Johnston became the first victim of Mount St. Helens. He was 30 years old. Meanwhile, the enormous landslide, half a mountain, careered into Spirit Lake, burying it and killing 84-year-old Harry Truman, who had refused to go. At 8:34 and 30 seconds, the blast cloud reached the next ridge 8 miles to the north. On the ridgetop, a local volcano enthusiast, Jerry Martin, was on CB radio to his friends. It would be his last message before he died. Minutes from the start of the blast, it showed no signs of stopping.
It starts to incorporate the surrounding air, and as it sucks in the air, that air is going to get heated up because the magma was at 900 degrees C, and you know that hot air expands and rises. So for a while the blast was actually gaining momentum by sucking in air and expanding.
3 minutes after the eruption, the blast cloud ripped through the landscape, heading towards Jim Schmanke and his workmates 20 miles from the volcano. They were totally unaware that Mount St. Helens had even erupted.
The first time I noticed there was something wrong was when Diaz came running down through the woods, screaming the volcano's exploding. Just looking at him, you know, you could tell he was scared to death. We weren't worried even at that time because there was no noise, there was nothing. Then all of a sudden we heard this stuff. I mean, and we don't know what it was, but it was, you could hear it coming through the trees. First it was kind of like a bunch of rocks and stuff. The noise was just deafening. I mean, it was just like big jets or freight trains just crashing through the woods, and it just turned black right in front of us. I mean, I just knew at that time I had to turn and just try to get out of there. It was unbelievable. I mean, it just took the woods and they were gone. I couldn't believe it. They were just completely gone. Couldn't breathe, tried to get air, tried to stand up. I thought for sure I was dead.
Jim Schmanke had been engulfed by the blast cloud. Although horrifically burned, he survived. His 3 workmates all died. The blast cloud hugged the land and soared over ridges until 20 miles from the mountain, it finally deposited its heavy load and dissipated as hot air high into the stratosphere. The explosion ended as abruptly as it began. But the sky was now choked with ash, which turned day to night.
On the ground, it appeared to be midnight, although these pictures were taken in Yakima, Washington, just before noon.
And I went to church, and I came home, and it was like midnight. I had to turn my lights on coming home from church because it was pitch black.
In 4 minutes, the blast had devastated 370 square miles. The explosion had been heard 700 miles away, but in the immediate area surrounding the volcano, victims heard nothing until a blast cloud was upon them.
In simple terms, what's happening is that the sound is refracted up above the volcano, it bounces off the stratosphere, and it comes back down at a distance beyond 60 miles radius away from the volcano.
The blast cloud had behaved like a liquid, swirling around the contours of valleys, knocking down trees in circular patterns. It destroyed tens of millions of trees. 57 people had lost their lives. At Mount St. Helens on May the 18th, 1980, scientists had witnessed two unprecedented events. The landslide was the largest ever recorded. It dumped 2 cubic miles of rock into the surrounding valleys. But the most destructive event was the lateral blast, which killed every living thing within a 17-mile radius. It was a unique opportunity for scientists to witness an extraordinary event, the first time that scientific instruments had been used to measure an actual eruption. It gave them an understanding about the way volcanoes work.
Mount St. Helens taught us a lot. I think most people around the world would agree that it was the start of modern volcanology in terms of really using instruments to start to predict what's going to happen at other volcanoes around the world.
But even today, they are no closer to predicting when Mount St. Helens or any of the other 12 volcanoes in the Cascades may erupt.
They don't erupt according to a pattern. They don't follow any sort of periodicity. They erupt when they want to, and there's no way to forecast which volcano will be active next.
A lot of nature is inherently unpredictable, so I think we can probably give time windows. I don't think we'll ever be able to give a precise time and date.
Meanwhile, people along the northwest coast of America continue to live in the shadow of these particularly destructive and violent volcanoes. For them, the only certainty is that one of these mountains will erupt again.